And that's actually maybe a good turn to the next one, which is abortion, because abortion was not a topic, whichever was so-called fundamental. It was relatively a decided issue in the minds of most Americans. To the extent that it was an issue for Republican voters in presidential primaries and perhaps in terms of turnout. Trump himself has no idea what to do here. Last time around, he could just say he was pro-life, but the stakes of being pro-life didn't have any real electoral consequences outside of driving Republican votes in his primary. This time around, you have literally tens of millions of women and voters who are, this is, if not their number one issue, one of the major issues influencing their decision to vote in the 2024 election. So Trump has changed his position now several times just in the last 96 hours. First and foremost, and this is what really set off a firestorm, was an NBC News interview where he appeared to come out against a 6-week amendment which is on the ballot in the state of Florida known as Amendment 4. Let's take a listen to his original comments.
Overturn Roe, and you want abortion to be a states' rights issue. In Florida, the state that you are a resident of, there's an abortion-related amendment on the ballot to overturn the 6-week ban in Florida. How are you going to vote on that?
Well, I think the 6-week is too short. It has to be more time, and so and I've told them that I want more weeks.
So you'll vote in favor of the amendment?
I am going to be voting that we need more than 6 weeks. Look, just so you understand, everybody wanted Roe v. Wade terminated for years, 52 years. I got it done. They wanted it to go back to the states.
Okay, so that is crazy because, of course, not only has he said previously, what did he say? 6 weeks was cruel, I think that's what
Something
he said in his criticism of Ron DeSantis. But he basically came out there and seemed to say that he was going to be voting in favor of Amendment 4. Amendment 4 is the so-called right to abortion initiative that will be actually on the ballot. And it says specifically that amendment to limit government interference with abortion, no law shall prohibit, penalize, delay, or restrict abortion before viability or when necessary to protect the patient's health as determined by the patient's healthcare provider. This amendment does not change the legislature's constitutional authority to require notification to a parent or guardian before a minor has an abortion. That's the text of the amendment.
So basically codifies Roe, effectively.
Well, not even codifies Roe. It's
Roe. Actually
past Roe, right? Because it isn't even talking about the first trimester. It effectively, and this is what the critics of it are saying, is that it legalizes abortion all the way up until 9 months, if that is what a healthcare provider were to recommend. Of course, relatively rare case. So, but anyway, that's part of the reason why some of the anti-abortion activists are very influenced by it. The other consequential thing that he said in that was not only that he opposed in principle 6 weeks as, quote, being too short, he also came out in favor of mandating insurance coverage of IVF for all Americans. Let's take a listen.
So we are paying for that treatment.
All Americans who want it?
For all Americans that get it, all Americans that need it. So we're going to be paying for that treatment, or we're going to be mandating that the insurance company pay.
Okay, so perhaps no comment pissed more traditional conservatives off than this one for two reasons. One, it actually expands insurance coverage. It quite literally mandates insurance companies to cover. But second was, of course, that there is a philosophical objection by some very, very religious elements of the GOP to IVF. So this was his first, like, 2016 moment that I'd seen in quite a long time. And I was like, hey, that's actually quite a smart play. But of course, you know, the people inside the coalition are going to be absolutely furious about it.
You know, I thought about this, and I'm not so sure it is a smart play, because in the same way that I don't think it's smart for Democrats to validate the frame of Republicans on immigration, an issue that they are never going to win on, I don't think it's smart for Republicans to validate that. I want them to. I would like them to be pro-choice. I appreciate Donald Trump for 3 minutes, you know, attempting to move the party in a more pro-choice direction. But just speaking tactically, he's validating the Democratic frame here. And he also just looks like panicked. And also you're going to see him completely change his position in the course of like 2 days' time. So any of the criticisms that they have of Kamala Harris, which are legitimate, of her being a flip-flopper, hard to make that land when you yourself have 4 different abortion positions over the course of one weekend. So even on the politics of this, I actually sort of agree with the the Lila Rose's. We can put her tweet up on the screen here. This was after these initial comments. She says expressions of disappointment are not enough. Disappointment is not being counted at the ballot box. The currency, the language in this season is votes. Trump has plenty of opportunity to still win the pro-life vote, and it will only help his campaign. I want Trump to win as a pro-life candidate. But let's be clear, Trump winning as a pro-abortion candidate is a loss for the pro-life movement. So the two risks politically are, number one, you demoralize your base, which has been very critical and very steadfast with him. You know, the like evangelical right, the religious right, since 2016 has been his strongest and most solid base of support. So you risk sort of, de-energizing them, demotivating them so that they don't turn out and they don't volunteer and all those sorts of things, which are critical. But also you are validating the Democratic Party frame. And you're always going to be the guy who put the people on the bench that overturned Roe. You're not getting away from that. So the position he took in 2016 in service of winning the Republican primary and then in service of holding on to evangelicals after the whole Access Hollywood situation, in a sense, they really have, I do think they helped him to be able to win that election. But they've really come home to roost in a way that I don't think he can, jiu-jitsu his way out of. On the IVF thing, though, if I were Democrats, I would take him up on it, put a bill on the floor, make him vote like, okay, let's guarantee IVF. Let's have the government pick up the bill or the insurance companies. If you have private health insurance, let's do it. Let's go and see what happens, because we've had legislation go through the Senate to protect IVF, and almost every Republican voted against it.
So I guess the reason that I have, I'm not thinking of this through politics. I'm trying to say, how do we just shift the Overton window so that these Lila Graces of the world are not like ruling the Republican Party for no reason? These are extremely unpopular positions. Sorry, it just is, as all recent politics has shown you. It is also extremely unpopular, and also it doesn't make sense to be the so-called pro-family party and not be in favor of expanding IVF protections.
I 100% agree with you on that.
I'm sticking with policy here. And I'm like, so I think it's important when the leader of the party is like, no, we're going to mandate that all government is going to pay for IVF. I'm like, hey, you know what? That's actually what a pro-family position would look like, and that's one of those where this is why everyone's like, oh, one of the attacks I saw somebody say like, when is the last time Saagar said anything, traditionally conservative? I was like, what makes you think that I'm traditionally conservative? Because that is one of those traditional conservative points that I think is extremely stupid if you do care about the eventual outcome. We can argue a million times about other stuff, but on this one too, this is something Ross Douthat had said previously as well. He's like, look, I'm pro-life, pro-family. And the truth is that being legitimately pro-life would require a massive expansion of a lot of family-based social safety net programs that most traditional Republicans are not comfortable with. And that is actually ideologically consistent. Now, we can argue a lot about marriage and work incentives and all that other stuff, but this is an actual difference in the framework. Now, on the politics of it, maybe you're right. But at the same time, a lot of it is trying to meet Americans where they are. The truth is the vast majority of Americans are quote unquote pro-choice under the Roe consensus. The absolute supermajority of people are pro-IVF. And then also, most people hate their insurance companies, and they also hate the modern healthcare system and the bills associated with fertility. So the average cost of a single round of IVF is some $12,000 to $14,000 for a single cycle, meaning it's a luxury good. And that's not right. It's actually not right.
I agree.
And what it tells us is that if we want to live in a society where people of all classes, experience, etc., who want to be able to have a family should be able to have one, then we need to expand protection of said medical in the same way that we would with so many other different policies. So my only point here is just that the current economics of it on healthcare, insurance, and all of that, trying to become less scary as Republicans on the issue is very important, I think, on a framework level. But you could be correct only because he's not willing to fully have some sort of sister soldier moment where he's like, no, guys, I'm breaking from you. He's like, you're either with me or you're not. I mean, I think he should, because frankly, I think they'll all show up to vote for him anyways. Let's go to the next part on Matt Walsh. He says, Amendment 4 in Florida will enshrine a right to murder children up until the moment. This is what I was talking about, by the way, in terms of what the pro-life activists were saying. They say it's an abject evil, radical leftism, etc. The point is that after significant pushback by Matt Walsh, by people like Michael Knowles, we can put the next one up there, who says, quote, as a practical matter, most persons created through IVF are destroyed or frozen indefinitely. Additionally, IVF establishes the domination of technology over the origin and destiny of human life and asserts a perverse right to a child and severs the unitive from the procreative. For those not familiar with such terms,
I'm sure 3% of people agree with you there, buddy.
Look, this is religious. It is perhaps a blessing and a curse that I know so many religious Catholics. Thus, I frankly understand what he's saying. But if you don't, then you wouldn't, maybe understand a lot of this. All of this is to say is that after a lot of pushback on the initial Amendment 4 conversation, Trump then reverses his position and now says, actually, no, he will not be voting for Amendment 4. Let's take a listen.
I'll be voting no for that reason.
No on Amendment 4.
For that reason, because it's a radical, and when you talk about radical, having a baby, doing an abortion in the 9th month is unacceptable to anybody. There's something in between, but the 6 is too short. It's just too short a period, and the 9 months is unacceptable. But for that reason, for the radicalization on the Democrat side, we're voting no.
They have tried this a million times, and guess what? It's just not going to work. We saw it in 2022. People are not concerned about the so-called cases of late-term abortion. They are very concerned about early-term, 6 weeks, and really between 6 and 12 first trimester. Again, like I said, a literal, not only majority, I think it's almost 60-some, maybe almost 70% of Americans support a Roe consensus. And thus, if we put this last piece up here, just Trump contorting himself on abortion in search of political gain, it is an extremely difficult position that he is in as long as he wants to try and keep all sides happy. I genuinely believe that this is one of those a time for choosing moments, and that you either have to, as I said, have a literal sister soldier moment and just say, look, guys, I don't support this. This is not the direction that we're going in. This is the new consensus. We are going to have to argue on a very different framework. And this is a lot like the way that the European right-wing parties argue on the issue of abortion. Or he's going to have to become explicitly pro-life and just live with the consequences. But this current, trying to satisfy everybody, it's a lot like immigration, where on the issue, it's just such a polarized one, and the choice actually does matter so much on where you directionally fall, that Trump, all of this firing in all different directions, it's just not going to work.
Yeah.
I don't see it right now.
No. And, after the DNC, he tweeted that thing about no one's going to be better for reproductive rights than me. No one is going to believe that. No one is going to believe that. I mean, we've got 40, 50 years of Republicans being the party of blocking abortion access. You are not going to change that association, just like Democrats are not going to change the association of suddenly think that Kamala Harris is going to be more of a hawk on the border than Donald Trump. That is not happening, right? So, there is no winning on this position for Donald Trump. And one of the things I wanted to mention, the New York Times Siena polls, which are considered very high quality polls, as good as they get in terms of for whatever that means. The number one issue for women under 45 is abortion. It's not actually the economy. It's not democracy. It's not anything else. The number one issue for women under 45 is abortion. That tells you how central this has become to a lot of political energy and activism at this point. Let me go ahead and put this ties in with what I just said, put B9 up on the screen. I mentioned this voter registration data earlier, but let's just show you really clearly here. This is TargetSmart. It is a Democratic-aligned firm, but they track voter registration, and those are just hard numbers. You can't Democrat or Republican the actual numbers of who's registering and when they register, whatever. You can see the spike in women registering to vote post-Dobbs. Huge spike. Led to monumental victories for the pro-choice position in places like Kansas and Kentucky, right? Then, after Kamala Harris becomes the nominee, you see a spike that actually surpasses the Dobbs spike in women registrants. And I guarantee you, Trump is seeing some of this data, and he has always had an instinct. He was the first Republican after Roe was overturned to say, this is going to be a problem for us. Privately, he was telling his aides, this is going to be a disaster for us. Ironic, given that he's the one who made that happen. But anyway, put that aside. This is effectively what they're terrified of right now, is that this issue, even if it's not the primary issue for a majority of voters. It is so motivating for such a key slice of the electorate that it could in and of itself be determinative, and has been in some of the special elections that we have seen post-Dobbs.
That wasn't the last thing I want to say. One of the other things I think is the reason stupid and Trump should have actually just stuck with his position on Amendment 4 is, guys, Amendment 4 is gonna pass, all right? I'll eat a sock here on the show if it doesn't pass, because that is one of the things about Florida. It can be a R+20 state, and abortion can also still be extremely, like, or at least being the pro-life position can be extremely unpopular. As we all learned in 2020, when Trump wins the state of Florida by some 3.5% and minimum wage passes by like 60%.
Yeah.
People are very multifaceted and very different, especially whenever they have to vote issue by issue at the ballot box. Amendment 4 is 100% going to pass. So coming out against it, what's the point? Like, why would you want to be on the other side and then give the Democrats even more of an edge to run up the scoreboard against you? Because they're going to guarantee you Florida Democratic Party will use that. Will he still win the state of Florida? Yeah, absolutely. But my point is just like, why give people more ammunition whenever they would need it? Because I can also tell you that Florida may not matter, but Arizona's got an abortion thing on the ballot, and you think they won't be slicing that in to their coverage? It's a gift to all of the people that you are running against, and especially in places like Arizona, where Kari Lake is a massive drag right now on the ticket. You need every inch that you can possibly fight for to win that state.
So for it to pass in Florida, because it's a constitutional amendment, it takes a 60% supermajority, and the polls that I've seen recently have it like basically right at that 60%. Yeah. But like you, I think it's likely it'll pass, especially with Trump kind of wavering on it. You know, I mean, that's a signal that a lot of people who are more moderate on abortion and maybe a little more Trump inclined or whatever, I think are going to see those initial comments and agree with them and be more inclined to vote for it. So I expect it to pass, but it's not, you know, it's not a gimme, given that it'll definitely get a majority. We'll get over 60%. Probably, but it's not a gimme, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. But I still think it's almost certainly going to pass. And even then,
we'll still make you eat a sock.
I mean, sure. I mean, all it is a dry mouth. But all I'm saying is that, you know, you don't want to be on the opposite ends of very, very popular issues. Hey, if you like that video, hit the like button or leave a comment below. It really helps get the show to more people.
And if you'd like to get the full show ad-free and in your inbox every morning, you can sign up at breakingpoints.com.
That's right. Get the full show, help support the future of independent media at breakingpoints.com.